Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are tackling something really specific, but I think incredibly fascinating.
Oh, for sure.
We're looking at what critics sometimes call the self-refuting prophecy. It's this theological puzzle that, when you first look at it, seems like a perfect, almost undeniable proof of falsehood.
It's a classic case, really. You have two key texts, and when you see them through a modern, translated lens, they just seem to click together perfectly to create this huge contradiction against the authenticity of the Prophet Muhammad.
And it's not new. This critique has generated, mountains of scholarly responses over centuries.
Precisely because it's so targeted, so specific.
That's right. So for this deep dive, we pulled together a whole stack of sources, everything from classical commentaries by people like Al-Quwabi and Ibn Kathir, all the way to, contemporary analysis from scholars like Jonathan A.C. Brown, and they're all focused on refuting this one single claim. So our mission is pretty simple. We want to show you why the overwhelming, totally unanimous scholarly consensus, and this is across Sunni and Shia traditions, rejects this argument.
They basically say that critics are making these fundamental category errors. They're ignoring timing, cause, and, this is the big one, linguistic precision.
Okay, so let's set the stage. Let's just lay out the alleged contradiction, because it all comes down to two lines of text. The first part is a conditional threat in the Quran.
Right. Surah Al-Haqqa, verses 44 to 46. It's this dramatic warning that says, look, if the prophet had fabricated revelation, if he'd made stuff up and put words in God's mouth, God would have surely seized him by the right hand.
And cut his life artery, the al-watin.
Exactly, the watin. That's the theological criterion. It's an immediate divine execution for a false prophet.
Okay, so that's pillar one. Pillar two is a famous, very authentic hadith. Years later, during his final illness, the prophet is describing this extreme pain he's feeling.
From the poison, right. The poison from Khaybar.
From the poison at Khaybar, and he says he feels like it's severing his aorta, or his major vessel, the al-abhar.
And right there, when you just hear that in English, the whole critique just snaps into focus.
It seems perfect.
The condition for a false prophet, the cutting of the aorta, seems to be met by the prophet's own description on his deathbed, a perfect mirror. So the question is, why does every single major scholar disagree?
Okay, let's unpack that. If the prophet himself is describing a symptom that echoes the exact punishment for fabrication, why isn't this seen as, a devastating self-refutation?
So the first and most immediate refutation is all about context and timing. You go back to the great commentators Ibn Kathir, Al-Quwabi, and they all stress the same thing.
Which is?
That the Quranic statement was a hypothetical. It was a conditional threat for instantaneous divine action.
Instantaneous.
The key word is immediate, a decisive seizure, not something that lingers.
But hold on, couldn't a critic just argue that, the pain did eventually manifest, so maybe it was just a slow-motion divine seizure that took 4 years? Why is that timeline so absolute?
Because the entire theological point is the immediacy. It's about proof. If a prophet fabricates revelation, the message has to be stopped right then and there. He has to be eliminated instantly to protect the religion from corruption.
Okay.
We know the poison was given at Khaybar around the year 7 AH. But the prophet didn't die. He survived. He lived for nearly 4 more years until 11 AH.
And crucially, he kept receiving revelation during that time.
That's the smoking gun for the scholars. He continued his mission. You have Quran 5.3, the verse about the perfection of the religion, revealed right near the end of his life.
So the fact that he was able to complete the mission.
Exactly. The fact that he completed his mission, taught everything, led the farewell pilgrimage, and kept getting verses, that's presented as the definitive empirical proof that the condition for punishment was never met. His survival for those 4 years disproves the accusation.
I see. So the completion of the mission just completely overrides the physical symptom in their view.
Okay, let's pivot to the second point, cause. What do scholars mean by a category error here?
This is huge for them. It's the distinction between divine cause and human cause. The Quran is very clear. Allah himself would intervene to cut the artery.
The ultimate executioner for the ultimate crime.
Right. But what was the actual physical cause of his suffering? It was human poisoning, a biological agent, a toxin given to him by the woman at Khaybar.
One is theological, the other is just biological.
Precisely, and that's a critical distinction. One is divine execution for a moral crime. The other is a physical attack by a human being.
Okay, but isn't that just a bit of clever apologetics? For the average person, if the symptom feels the same, my artery's being cut, why does it matter if the source was God or poison?
It matters because of how you classify the death itself. And this is where scholars like Ibn Turar and Ibn Taymiyyah come in. They argue that suffering, even death at the hands of other humans, doesn't negate prophethood at all. If anything, it's part of the job description for a prophet.
It is. I mean, look at the stories. So many prophets suffered horribly or were killed by their own people. Suffering isn't a sign of divine failure. It's part of the prophetic experience.
Wow, so they're not just defending against an attack, they're completely reframing the event. They're moving it from the category of failure into the category of the highest honor.
That is the absolute core of the argument. His painful death isn't divine retribution. It's classified as martyrdom, shahada,
Dying from an injury you got while doing your job as a prophet.
which elevates his status. It's the theological opposite of being executed by God for being a liar. Al-Razi, the great commentator, says this is the fundamental mistake the critics make, confusing martyrdom with punishment.
That's a really solid structural defense.
Yeah.
Timing and category. But let's be honest, the thing that makes the critique so sticky is that mirrored language.
No language, yeah.
So how do scholars finally break that linguistic parallel? Because this feels like the real hinge point.
It is the hinge point. And it's all about something that just gets completely lost in translation. If you only read the English, where aorta is often used for both, the contradiction looks, well, unbeatable.
But the scholarly defense says you have to look at the original Arabic.
You absolutely have to. They demand linguistic precision.
Okay, so let's do the deep dive on the two words. What's the word used in the Quran, in the conditional threat?
In the Quran, it's al-watin. This is a very, very specific anatomical term. It means the vital life artery, the main vessel coming right out of the heart.
The one that, if you cut it, means instant death.
Instant, irreversible death. It's the perfect word for a swift, divine execution. That's watin.
Okay, that's the word for the threat. Now, what's the word the prophet used years later to describe his pain from the poison?
That word is al-abhar, and this is a much more general term. It can mean a major dorsal vessel, an artery or vein in the back or near the spine. But, and this is crucial, classical scholars, like the master hadith commentator Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, point out that al-abhar was very often used idiomatically in Arabic.
Idiomatically.
Okay.
So not as a literal medical diagnosis.
Not at all. It was a description of extreme pain. Think about how we talk in English. We say, that news was heart-stopping, or I was cut to the core.
You don't mean your heart literally stopped.
Exactly. You're not giving a medical report. You're using a powerful image to describe an intense feeling. The phrase about the abhar being cut was a known idiom for life-threatening, agonizing pain. Al-Nawawi confirms this in his commentary on Sahih Muslim.
So the prophet wasn't making a theological confession with his dying breath. He was just using the vivid, common language of his time to say, I am in absolute agony from this poison.
That is the entire weight of the linguistic defense. The whole argument that he experienced the exact same symptom only works if you flatten the language, if you ignore the critical difference between watin, the specific artery of the divine threat, and abhar, the general vessel, or more likely the idiom for acute pain.
The perfect alignment is just a ghost created by translation.
A failure of translation to capture that Arabic nuance? Yes.
It's amazing. The entire critical argument rests on what the English language can't quite capture. That's a phenomenal breakdown. Okay, so let's zoom out a bit. Let's talk broader theology.
Sure.
If the prophet was divinely protected, the concept of isma, why did this ambiguity even exist? Why did he have to suffer human frailties at all?
That takes us right to the scope of prophetic protection, or isma. The Islamic consensus here is really clear. Infallibility is primarily about one thing: the conveyance of revelation.
Protecting the message.
Protecting the message. Its job is to make sure the revelation isn't corrupted or fabricated or intentionally mistaught. That's why he couldn't have lied about the Quran.
So the protection's on the office, the message itself, not necessarily the man's physical body.
Precisely. Isma does not mean he's immune to biology. It doesn't mean he can't get sick or injured or feel pain or die.
In fact, scholars would say he had to.
He had to. If he were some kind of Superman who never felt pain, how could he be a model for humanity? He was physically fallible, he got injured in battle, he got sick, and he felt extreme pain from that poison. His words were a human description of agony, not a theological statement on his status.
That makes a lot of sense. But what about the source itself? If this hadith is the supposed smoking gun for critics, why on earth did the early Muslim community preserve it? Why not just quietly let it disappear?
I love this question because it speaks to the intellectual honesty of the tradition. For these scholars, the amana, the sacred trust of transmission, was paramount. You preserve authentic reports even if they seem difficult.
Honesty over convenience.
Absolutely, they didn't hide from it. This is why you find this exact hadith discussed at length in all the major classical commentaries, Al-Bari, Ibn Ajar's Fath al-Bari. They preserved it, they debated the meaning of al-Abhar, and they presented their refutations right out in the open. They refused to just cut out material because it was inconvenient.
A real commitment to the text. Okay, one last thing before we synthesize all this. What about the modern psychological arguments? The idea that this was some kind of Freudian slip or a subconscious admission of guilt.
Yeah, those are summarily rejected by scholars, and for good reason. They commit a huge anachronism.
You can't apply 20th century psychology to 7th century Arabia.
You just can't. You have to read the language in its proper historical and rhetorical context. Instead of a psychological slip, we should see it as high 7th century Arabic rhetoric,
Which was full of
hyperbole, vivid physical imagery, metaphors. It was how you conveyed extreme emotion or pain. He was in mortal agony. His choice of words came from the powerful rhetorical toolbox of his time, not some subconscious guilt. There's just zero textual evidence for that reading.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, who's trying to make sense of this really complex source material? The scholarly defense is this incredibly sophisticated, three-pronged framework that really dissolves that surface-level contradiction.
It does. First, you have the timing. His mission was completed over 4 more years, which overrides the requirement for an immediate punishment. Second, the cause. It was human poisoning, which makes his death martyrdom, not a divine execution.
And finally, the knockout punch.
The linguistics. The crucial, precise difference between al-watin, the specific life artery in the threat, and al-abhar, the general vessel, or more likely, the idiom for severe pain. That breaks the entire parallel.
And this really shows you something vital about engaging with these texts. The simple, really compelling story that critics tell he died by his own words. It almost completely depends on ignoring context, ignoring timing, and especially ignoring linguistic precision.
The whole contradiction just vanishes when you read the text inside its own framework.
It's not just a matter of opinion, it's about technical detail.
Verifiable technical criteria, exactly.
And that brings us to a final provocative thought for you to take away, something that ties this all back to the nature of belief itself. The scholars argue that the prophet's death, in its ambiguity, wasn't a punishment but a test of faith.
Think about it. If the rules were completely empirically clear, if every false prophet just dropped dead on the spot, no questions asked, would you even need faith?
Would belief still be a choice? This invites you to think about the role of ambiguity in human suffering in theological systems that are designed to challenge and deepen belief, rather than just eliminate all possible doubt.